Hello, my name is Father James McLucas, and we're here to inaugurate the video presentation of Keep the Faith's Catholic Insight. We're sitting here beneath an original picture of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and of course, most importantly, Our Lady. We're going to inaugurate Catholic Insight with a discussion about Catholic higher education, and we've chosen that topic because Catholic parents have worked very hard to form their children in the faith, especially the burgeoning numbers of homeschooling parents. And we think that now they're facing their children's college years, and we'd like to discuss a little bit about that. I myself have had 4 years as a Catholic chaplain and during my 27 years of priesthood, and I am privileged to have today a priest and a friend, Father Vincent Young, who has had 10 years as a Catholic chaplain at Thomas Aquinas College in Santa Paula, California. Father, welcome to Catholic Insight.
Thanks, Father. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Father, let's begin with the basics. What are the major criteria by which parents may identify a college as being Catholic?
Easy question, maybe not so easy an answer. Clearly, parents, particularly who have chosen to homeschool and made all the sacrifices to do it, have a sense of what they're doing and why. That is, to preserve virtue and the Catholic atmosphere so their children can grow and become indeed saints to get to heaven. So the standards for a college are the same. Fidelity to the magisterium of the Church, the living reality of purity of doctrine, of truth, a sound spiritual foundation, a tradition that includes the whole of the patrimony of the Church, not reinterpreted, not reassessed, not updated, but the pure, simple milk of the traditions of the Church.
Is there a particular philosophical and theological patrimony that we'd be interested in terms of imparting to our Catholic college students?
Well, again, kids go to college as a kind of crown for the 12 years that they have suffered and struggled and worked and enjoyed building the foundation for their education. The next years that we call college years are the crowning of that. The kids themselves are much more likely to be intellectually stimulated now. They need reinforcement. They need a certain freedom that being at home doesn't always afford. So they need an institution that is going to challenge them intellectually, but within the context of the patrimony of the Church. St. Thomas, for example, is the very foundation stone of Catholic intellectual life, because he summarizes the fathers of the Church, which is a marvelous contribution to the identity of the Church in Catholicism. But the fathers, being both Greek and Latin, being separated by time and circumstance, need to have someone bring them together, to glue them, because otherwise one can easily go off on this or that other trend. And St. Thomas Aquinas does that. That's why the Church has made him the very, as I said, foundation stone upon which Catholic education should be built. So I think, at least for starters, if there is this commitment, this public adherence to, and a hope that any institution holds on to, I think that's the beginning of a right journey, as it were.
Would you agree, because it's basically my contention, that a Catholic college whose philosophy program and theology program does not teach St. Thomas Aquinas, that perhaps we should stay away from it?
Oh, without question, because it's, in effect, if there's any other knowledge being imparted, and certainly in terms of the human sciences, that's not a problem, perhaps, but if you're talking about the formation of the mind and the heart, that is philosophy, ethics, and certainly theology, without St. Thomas, it's completely ersatz. It's bankrupt. It's denatured. There's nothing there.
sometimes one hears faint and sometimes not so faint rumblings from, let's say, more, at least they consider themselves progressive Catholic educators, that traditional Catholic colleges, meaning traditional Catholic curriculum, are a little bit too contramundum, a little bit too much against the world. How would you respond to that?
With the words of the gospel, our Lord said, if they're against me, they're going to be against you. Catholics have always been contramundum. They've always been against the zeitgeist in a wounded world by original sin, a wounded world by human frailty and all of the difficulties that come with that. So that's not new. Contramundum has always been the Catholic thing. Not in your face, not, brandishing the sword, but by living it with conviction, determination, honesty, to proclaim by word and example the good, the true, and the beautiful. But you need that sense that we live for heaven, not for earth.
And there's also, I think, there's something to be said for the fact that one can be contra culture, especially, and yet still show an affinity for the world because it's God's creation, and therefore what we're trying to do under God's grace is to make the world more reflective of His kingdom. And therefore, to a certain extent, there's a tension between being contramundum, but also being those, who appreciate the beauty of the world. And maybe that comes to my next question, this whole idea of beauty. There are some schools that have the reputation of being a Catholic college because they have a more traditional Catholic curriculum. But if you visit the campus, you'll notice that there are signals that what is taught in the classroom may not be able to be absorbed by students because they're hindered by a certain atmosphere on the college campus.
Right,
could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there's no such thing as life in a vacuum. When kids go away to school, especially those who are younger, they may not necessarily be mature as maybe their parents perhaps would have liked them. There are a number of individual subjective qualities that obviously are going to affect each individual student, but I think that particularly the younger ones, that is 18, 19, 20-year-olds that may be away from school from the first time, regardless of the backgrounds they come from, need a wholesome and healthy environment that isn't just intellectual, but likewise, and including certainly, a very deep spiritual commitment to Catholicism. And that means a life of the sacraments, of grace, of familiarity with all that the patrimony of the Church includes, her history, her saints. Certainly our Blessed Lady is a central point of even the intellectual life. She is the very seat of wisdom. So that a school that will provide an atmosphere due to the goodness or the efforts to be good on the part of the peers, integrity and good example of life on part of the staff, their professors, their teachers, and all the things that reinforce what is learned in the classroom by a life of virtue, at least insofar as it's being lived, it's being attempted, is a very important element, I think, for these young people, especially within my experience, because kids that are ambivalent, that are in fact occasionally trying to kind of push horizons a little bit, it's natural in terms of the human response. Parents, I'm sure, are much more aware of this than we would be. But they need clearly this reinforcement. A clear example of that would be the effect that music has on the young people today. The music today will always be a bit of controversy. It's always going to strike a nerve, and someone is going to respond emotionally, perhaps more than intellectually. But there is no doubt that as a single example of the bankruptcy and the moral depravity of the culture that we have allowed to grow, certainly in the past 50 or more years, because it's been so dramatic a decline, is seen in its music, its entertainment, the media. If youngsters are not weaned away from that insofar as they're subjected to it or if they're protected from it to begin with, this itself is indicative, I think, of what you will find in an atmosphere that's created among their peers attitudinally and otherwise, so that a school that discourages the modern media, discourages these examples of those things that deplete the soul, but instead foster the arts, the letters, the beauty of good music, particularly popular music, I think can make a big difference in these youngsters. And I've seen, if you will, a kind of conversion take place because being open to the beauty of good music in a very human way, it's easier for them to make steps in other directions, not just spiritually, but also, and because we're talking about education, intellectually. So I think that's not an unimportant question. I think it's very important.
The whole idea of a natural underpinning for the supernatural life, I think, is very, very key in the sense that, for instance, at Christendom College, where I spent 4 wonderful years, there was a rule against what they called PDA, public displays of affection. And when the students first got onto campus, that was always, for me, I spent most of my time talking to the freshmen, explaining to them why this was a good rule. But, you know, within a very short time, the students were saying, you know, Father, you were right, okay? It just is so freeing not to have to go through a certain type of social awkwardness about, you know, and worrying about proper public displays of affection. There is a major problem, though, okay? Due mostly to Catholic homeschooling, there will be an increasing demand for Catholic colleges and with a traditional Orthodox Catholic curriculum, but there are few colleges that meet that criteria. There are many minds to nourish, but relatively few to provide the nourishment. What do Catholic parents do if they're unable to place their children into an Orthodox, solidly Catholic college?
Again, we all have easy questions with not such easy answers. But I think some things that parents should consider, that is, for different reasons that are known and proper to each family, of course, their children do not go to several of the very good schools that exist presently for the education of their kids. I would suggest perhaps a scenario such as the following, which, again, is just an opinion and it's just off the top of my head. But I would suggest that if they were to stay at home and go to a 2-year program, that might be very helpful. It gives them at least a chance to have a college experience of some kind. It can be very challenging and stimulating, but yet they have the support and the input of their families, which can still be a very good thing at this point based on the internal dynamic of the family. Another thing that I think would be helpful is that if it's at all possible, the youngsters, if not already in their youth, have encountered a good and reliable, trustworthy, and holy priest, that at this point in their lives, at 18, 19, and 20, that they have a kind of mentor in the intellectual life, in the life of Catholic thought, that can perhaps give them pointers, explain things, challenge them, clarify, and what have you. That, I think, would bear a great deal of grace. I've encountered students like that myself, and I think it's been very helpful for them until such time as their circumstances could improve a bit by way of an ideal. Another possibility is, of course, to build on the realities that the homeschooling has given them in a social sense. They've already grown up with friends. They've already grown up with others who have been part or parcel to their lives, at least socially, now intellectually, to build on that, to in fact get together and discuss great things, great books, perhaps go to concerts, have a book reading circle. There are numbers of things that youngsters at this point could do to share and yet being reinforced on a social level so that they can reinforce the faith. This, of course, over and above, I think, a very simple but yet solid and consistent spiritual life. You can't replace that, and of course, grace and nature always have to work together. So I would think that while not perhaps an ideal solution, it's something for parents to consider, and even the students themselves. They obviously have a great deal of input here, too. So I think whatever will kind of work, as they say, in terms of trying different things to reinforce the sacrifices and the success of the homeschooling experience would be a good thing.
I've been telling parents if they cannot get their children into a traditional Catholic school with an Orthodox traditional Catholic curriculum and spiritual atmosphere, that consider going to a local community college. Most states have them. Okay,
right.
Spend those 2 years. Perhaps as a supplement, there's an online college now, Christ the King College, I believe it's called by run by Dr. Thomas Streletsky.
Yes, I know several students who have been
they can begin to, because I think that filling in the intellectual vacuum that exists, okay, at the college level in terms of the faith is very, very important for them to be also at the same time that they're expanding their science and their math and their literature understanding and academic advancement. The understanding of the faith should also be increasing. And during that 2 years, therefore, supplemented, okay, with a formal study, for instance, like an online college.
Sure.
Also, then after those final 2 years, I think that, you know, personally, Father, okay, with me, if you can't find a traditional Catholic college, don't send them to a Catholic college, because I think they can do more damage trying to go to a college that passes itself off as Catholic, but really nothing to do with Catholicism, and therefore they'll get the idea, the wrong idea about what the faith actually is. And that, I think, therefore, that for the final 2 years of college, seek either a private college or a state university or college, and try to find one located near what I would say would be a traditional Latin Mass chapel, because there you will usually have, especially the priests trained by traditional societies, all right, they themselves are trained Thomistically in philosophy and theology, and they have a traditional Catholic spirituality. They'll at least be near a priest that will be able to mentor them, as you mentioned. So even though they wouldn't have that necessarily on campus, they would have it at a place nearby. And remember, nemo dat quod non habet. Don't go to a priest who hasn't been trained Thomistically, all right, and in philosophy and spirituality and theology. Go to some place that is very, very nearby. Father, we're out of time, all right, so I'm going to say, first of all, thank you so much for being with us for this very quick 15 minutes.
Thank you very
I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in this first program of Catholic Insight, and we hope to see you again in the future. God bless, and have a glorious Easter.
Okay.
Gloria